I stood on the veranda of my house, looking out over the desert landscape of Boulder City, watching the sun set over the horizon, coloring the sky with shades of purple and gold. In my 72 years, I had grown accustomed to being alone. My husband Alfred died 10 years ago, leaving me this spacious two-story house and a decent fortune. Some considered me harsh and even cruel, but I preferred to call it practicality. After all, it's not my fault that most people are too soft-hearted for this world. My name is Abigail Penrose, and I am not one to tolerate stupidity or disrespect, especially when it comes to my home, my fortress that Alfred and I have spent a lifetime building. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a spacious living room with a natural stone fireplace, a kitchen every housewife dreams of, and a backyard where I grow my prize roses. Every inch of this house has been thoughtfully designed and arranged by me personally. Mom, I brought the groceries you asked for. The voice of Hezekiah, my only son, brought me out of my reverie. He came in through the back door carrying 2 paper bags of groceries. In his 45, he still looked like a student, perpetually disheveled blonde hair, thin-rimmed glasses, baggy clothes. A scientist to the core, a professor of anthropology at the local college, smart but completely impractical. Put them on the table, I said, not turning around. You're 20 minutes late. Sorry, there was a meeting in the department. I snorted. Typical excuse. Hezekiah had always been like that, clouded by his research and books, oblivious to the real world around him. That's why he fell into that woman's trap. Prue Baxter, now Prue Penrose, my sister-in-law for 8 years now, though I still can't bring myself to call her a member of the family. A petty predator from a small town in West Virginia, with her fake smile and eyes that are always looking out for gain. She showed up at a conference where Hezekiah was speaking, charmed him with her ostensible interest in his research, and 6 months later they were standing at the altar. Prue says hi, Hezekiah said, unpacking the groceries. I'm sure she does. I finally turned and walked into the house. Is she working late again tonight? She has an important project at the gallery. The new exhibit opens in 2 weeks. Prue worked at an art gallery, doing some kind of installation work. Another useless profession, if you ask me. But it was a good fit for a woman whose main goal was to surround herself with powerful and wealthy people. I sat at the kitchen table, watching my son put the food on the shelves. Even in this simple act, I could sense his insecurity, as if he were a guest in my home. And after all, it had once been his home too. Have you had dinner yet? I asked. Yeah, Prue and I grabbed a bite in town. Of course they did. They always ate somewhere else, avoiding invitations to my dinners. Prue was probably afraid I might put something in her food. Not that the thought hadn't crossed my mind. Sit down. I pointed to the chair across from me. We need to talk. Hezekiah sat down obediently, folding his hands on the table like a schoolboy in front of the principal. His gaze was wary. He knew my tone. I got the news about Caroline. Aunt Caroline? Did something happen? She died last night. Heart attack. My sister Caroline was 3 years younger than me. We were never particularly close, but we kept in touch. She lived in Florida for the last 15 years, and we only saw each other a few times. Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. Hezekiah reached across the table to take my hand, but I pulled away. There's no need to be dramatic. She was 70 years old and had a heart condition. It wasn't a surprise. But really, the news of my sister's death hit me deeper than I wanted to show. She was the last living person who remembered me as a child. The last link to a past that is now finally gone. Still, it's hard news. Hezekiah took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes tiredly. Are you going to the funeral? No. Caroline wanted a cremation without ceremony. Her daughter Velma will take care of everything. I didn't mention that my niece had made it clear she didn't want me at the funeral. The last time I'd seen her, I'd had the indiscretion to point out that her husband was probably cheating on her with her secretary. Velma didn't appreciate my insight, although she did divorce him a year later. But this situation got me thinking, I continued. I'm not getting any younger, Hezekiah. And maybe I should start doing the things I've always put off. What do you mean? I've decided to go to Hawaii for 2 weeks. Hezekiah stared at me as if I'd announced my intention to fly to the moon. Hawaii? You? But you hate traveling. I don't hate traveling. I cut him off. I hate meaningless trips without purpose or comfort. It's different. In fact, Alfred had always wanted to visit Hawaii. We had planned a trip for our 40th anniversary, but he had suffered a stroke 3 months before that date. Now, after Caroline's death, I felt a strange need to fulfill that long-standing promise. That's wonderful, Mom. Hezekiah smiled, but I could see the worry in his eyes. When do you plan to go? Next Saturday. I've already booked a hotel in Maui and bought tickets. So soon? Who's going to look after the house? You, obviously. I raised an eyebrow, unless, of course, it's too much of a burden for you. No, of course not. I'm just surprised. You've never left the house for long before. It was true. In the last 10 years, my longest absence was a 3-day trip to Salt Lake City for my cousin's funeral. Well, as you rightly pointed out, that's unusual for me, so I need assurances that my house will be okay. I stood up and walked over to the cupboard, from which I pulled out a thick folder. Here are instructions for caring for my roses, watering schedules, alarm settings, important phone numbers, and more. Study it carefully. Hezekiah took the folder with a look on his face as if I'd handed him instructions on how to defuse a bomb. Mom, I'm not a child. I'm perfectly capable of looking after the house for a couple weeks. I'm well aware of your abilities, which is why I prepared the instructions. I sat back down at the table. And one more important thing, I don't want strangers in the house. Intruders? His voice trembled slightly. Yes, outsiders. People who aren't family members, visitors, guests. How else can I explain it? I understand the meaning of the word, Mother. Hezekiah blushed. I just don't understand why the rules are so strict. What if Prue wants to come in? Prue is your wife. She's technically a member of the family, though I use that term with great reluctance. She can come over, but no parties, no friends, no co-workers from work. Do you understand me? Yes, understood. He pressed his lips into a thin line. Anything else? Yes. The guest bedroom on the second floor is locked. Don't try to go in there. I keep some personal items there, and I wouldn't want anyone touching them. There wasn't really anything special in that room, just old furniture and a few boxes of photos. But I like to maintain a certain level of mystery. It kept people in suspense. Whatever you say. Hezekiah stood up, clearly wanting to end the conversation. I must go. I still have work to do for the evening. Of course, your precious work. I couldn't help but be sarcastic. Don't forget to pick up the folder. He took the folder and headed for the door. I'll come back tomorrow to discuss the details, he said, already standing in the doorway. Take care of yourself, Mom. When the door closed behind him, I was alone in the kitchen. The silence of the house enveloped me, like an old, familiar blanket. I went to the window and watched Hezekiah's car pull out of the driveway. He didn't even turn around to wave. Well, maybe this trip was really what I needed. Maybe the distance will help me understand what's going on with my son and why he's so distant from me. Or at least give me a respite from the constant frustration I felt looking at his life decisions. I began to mentally make a list of things I would need to take with me to Hawaii. This would be my first real trip in years, and probably my last. It was all the more important to make sure my home would remain safe in my absence. I couldn't escape the vague worry that Hezekiah was hiding something. His reaction to my rules had been too nervous, but perhaps I was just getting paranoid in my old age. Hezekiah, for all his faults, had always been honest. He wouldn't break my rules, especially knowing how important this house was to me. With that comforting thought, I began to get ready for dinner, deciding that tomorrow I would take care of preparations for the trip. After all, what could happen in 2 weeks? The Hawaiian sun was burning my pale skin. Despite the highest level of sunscreen I methodically applied every 2 hours, I sat under a large umbrella on the beach at the Wiley Beach Resort and watched the tourists frolicking in the waves. Young families with squealing children, couples showing their affection in a way too explicit for a public place, lonely sunbathers. All of them seemed like strange creatures from another world. My white, wide-brimmed hat and long-sleeved beach dress stood out among the brightly colored swimsuits and beach shorts. The waiter, a young Hawaiian man with traditional tattoos on his arms, brought me another non-alcoholic mojito. "Everything okay, ma'am? Would you like anything else?" he asked with a professional smile. "Everything's fine, thank you," I replied, adding a generous tip to the bill. I'm always nice to the service staff, unlike many people in my position. Maybe it was because I'd worked as a waitress to pay for school when I was young until I met Alfred. 5 days in Maui, and I still couldn't completely relax. I'd booked the most expensive room with an ocean view and all the amenities, but I still felt out of place. Perhaps I was too used to my home, my routine, my life to truly enjoy my vacation. And yet, there was something peaceful about the endless horizon where the blue of the sky merged with the ocean, something liberating about being so far away from Boulder City and all the problems left behind. I pulled a shabby book out of my bag, a Jane Austen novel I'd reread for probably the 20th time. But even my favorite story couldn't hold my attention. My thoughts kept returning to Hezekiah and our last conversation before I left. He arrived, as promised, the day after our conversation in the kitchen. He brought his laptop so we could check all my reservations and insisted on installing a video calling app on my phone. "Just in case," he said, showing me how to use it. "If you have any questions or just want to talk." I was touched by that concern, though I'd never admit it. We'd always been reticent to show our feelings. Even when he was a baby, I rarely hugged him, believing that displays of affection only spoil children. Alfred was a more emotional parent, but after his death, there was this formal, almost businesslike manner between me and my son. "Mom, I've been meaning to ask," Hezekiah began when we were done with the technicalities. "Why were you so insistent that there be no strangers in the house?" I looked at him carefully. "Because I don't want strangers walking around my house in my absence. Isn't that obvious?" "Yes, but you've never mentioned it before. Last time you left, you didn't give such instructions. Last time I went away for 3 days, not 2 weeks. I tried to keep my tone neutral. I just want my house to be my home when I get back. Is that so hard to understand?" Hezekiah looked concerned, but didn't pursue the topic further. Instead, he switched to discussing the details of caring for the house. I showed him where the keys to all the doors were, how to set up the alarm system, the watering schedule for the garden. We checked all the appliances, making sure everything was working properly. But the whole time I could feel him tense, like he wanted to say something but didn't dare. When it was time to say goodbye, he hugged me awkwardly, as if he wasn't sure how I would react. "Have a good vacation, Mom. Please call if you need anything." I patted him lightly on the back, surprised by this sudden show of affection. "I'll be fine. Just keep an eye on the house." Now, sitting on the beach in Maui, I wondered if he'd noticed my concern. Perhaps my fears were unfounded. After all, what could have happened? Hezekiah was a grown man, a university professor. He wouldn't throw parties or invite crowds of people to my house, and yet something kept bugging me. Maybe it was a gut feeling, developed through years of wariness. Or maybe I just wasn't used to trusting people, even my own son. I closed the book and decided to walk along the shore. The ocean breeze ruffled my dress, and the small waves lapped at my feet. Along the surf line, vendors offered tourists all kinds of souvenirs, from seashells to braided bracelets. A young Hawaiian girl sitting on a small mat was weaving wreaths of flowers. "Lay for you, ma'am?" she asked with a smile. "Brings the blessings of the islands." I paused, looking at her work. White and yellow flowers were skillfully woven into the wreath. "How much?" $20. I knew it was overpriced for tourists, but I pulled out the money and handed it to her. The girl stood up, slipped the wreath around my neck, and bowed slightly. "Aloha, may the spirits of the islands protect you." I nodded back and continued my walk. The wreath of fresh flowers smelled pleasant, reminding me of the gardens I had once seen in France, on a trip Alfred and I had taken many years ago. We had just married then, both of us young and hopeful. Alfred was working as an engineer for a growing company. I had just gotten a degree in economics. We planned a big family, at least 3 children. But life took a different course. I had 2 miscarriages after Hezekiah, and the doctors said we couldn't have any more children. Maybe that's why I had so much custody of our only son, trying to protect him from any mistakes he might have made. Maybe that's why I reacted so negatively to his marriage to Prue, a woman I was sure would not bring him happiness. Prue Baxter. Even mentally saying that name made me cringe. From the first time I'd met her, I'd sensed something fake about her. Her interest in Hezekiah's research, her admiration for his work, it all seemed contrived. She smiled too broadly, laughed too loudly, showed enthusiasm for things she clearly had no idea about. But Hezekiah was fascinated. In his 37, he'd never been in a serious relationship, always too busy working, too immersed in his research. Prue was like a bright ray of light in his world of books and theories. She was attractive. I couldn't deny it. Slender, with long dark hair and expressive eyes. And she knew how to use her looks. Their wedding was modest, a ceremony in the garden of a local hotel. A few of Hezekiah's co-workers and a bunch of Prue's relatives, whom I saw for the first and, I hoped, the last time. A rowdy family from a small town, all speaking with that distinctive West Virginia accent that cut my ears. After the wedding, they settled into a small house near the college. I'd suggested they live in my house. There was plenty of room for everyone, and Hezekiah could save money on rent, but Prue insisted on separate housing. "A young family needs space to grow," she said, with the same smile that always seemed fake to me. Over the years, my suspicions have only grown stronger. Prue worked several jobs, never staying anywhere for long. First at a travel agency, then at an advertising firm, now at an art gallery. She always found reasons not to come to the family dinners I hosted. And Hezekiah, my once so devoted son, always took her side. I reached the edge of the beach where the cliffs formed a natural boundary. There were fewer people here, and I was able to crouch on a large rock, watching the waves crash against the shore. The sun was already beginning to slip toward the horizon, coloring the sky with orange and pink hues. Hawaii was beautiful. There was no doubt about it. Maybe I should have come here earlier, with Alfred while we had time. Maybe then I could have enjoyed this beauty without the oppressive sense of loneliness that now accompanied me everywhere. My phone rang, snapping me out of my musings. The number was an unfamiliar one, with a Nevada area code. "Abigail Penrose," I answered. "Abigail? It's Gloria Wilkins. I hope I'm not distracting you." Gloria had been my neighbor for over 20 years. A widow like me, but unlike me, she had an active social life, participated in all of Boulder City's social events, and knew all the local gossip. "Gloria," I tried to hide the surprise in my voice. "To what do I owe the honor?" "Oh, honey, I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Hezekiah told me you were in Hawaii. It's so unlike you to go so far away. I thought I'd get a little change of scenery, I answered dryly. I'm fine. Thank you for your concern. That's wonderful, darling. Just wonderful. We all need a little change sometimes, especially at our age. I cringed. Gloria was 5 years older than me, but she always spoke as if we were the same age. Anything else, Gloria? I'm a little busy right now. Oh, I was just wondering if everything's okay at your house. It's been unusually busy lately. I'm tense. What do you mean? Well, cars coming and going all the time. A lot of people I've never seen in the neighborhood before. There was even some music going on late last night. I thought maybe Hezekiah was having a party. My fingers gripped the phone so hard, my knuckles turned white. Gloria, are you sure? Absolutely, darling. My windows are right on your house. I can see everything. There were at least 10 cars there yesterday. I even wanted to call Hezekiah to see if everything was okay, but then I decided it was none of my business. You were right to call me, I said calmly, even though I was seething inside. Did you happen to see who those people were? Oh, I didn't get a good look at them. Young people, as far as I could tell. I saw a woman with two small children, very noisy, by the way, and a couple of older people. Hezekiah's relatives, maybe? Or his wife. Prue's relatives, of course. Her endless family from West Virginia. But why are they in my house? And why did Hezekiah let this happen? Gloria, thank you for the information. I'll look into it. I thought you should know. You're always so protective of your home. I hope I didn't cause any trouble for Hezekiah. No, you didn't. You did the right thing. I paused. Please don't tell Hezekiah about our conversation. I'll contact him myself. Of course, dear. Your secrets are always safe with me. Enjoy your vacation. I passed out, and for a few minutes I just sat staring at the ocean. A storm of emotions raged inside me: anger, frustration, a sense of betrayal. Hezekiah knew how important my home was to me. He knew I didn't want outsiders there, and yet he violated my trust. Or was it Prue's idea? Yeah, probably. She's always struck me as a calculating person, ready to seize any opportunity for gain. Perhaps she saw my absence as a chance to show her generosity at my expense by inviting her extended family to stay in her comfortable home. I stood up and walked with a determined stride back to the hotel. On the way, I pulled out my phone and opened the airline reservation app. I needed to get back to Boulder City as soon as possible. In the hotel lobby, I approached the concierge, an elderly Hawaiian man with gray hair and a friendly smile. What can I do for you, Mrs. Penrose? I need to change my return flight. I need to get home as soon as possible. Tomorrow, if possible. His smile faded slightly. Has something serious happened? A family emergency, I answered briefly. I would appreciate your help. Sure, give me a few minutes and I'll check out the available options. While he worked at his computer, I pondered what to do next. Should I call Hezekiah? No, that would alert him to my return. Better to take them all by surprise. I wanted to see their faces when I showed up on my own doorstep. There's a 6 a.m. flight tomorrow morning, connecting in Los Angeles, the concierge said. You'll arrive in Las Vegas around 4 o'clock local time. Make your reservation, I said, holding out my credit card, and please book a cab to the airport for 5 in the morning. Of course, Mrs. Penrose. And what about the rest of our hotel stay? I'll pay for the entire reservation, don't worry about that. When the formalities were settled, I went up to my room and started packing. The anger I felt initially was replaced by a cold determination. I wasn't going to throw a tantrum or cause a scandal. No, I planned to act methodically and calculatedly. Whoever was in my house would regret their decision to take advantage of my absence. Hezekiah and Prue would also learn what it meant to betray my trust. I walked over to the window, looking out at the sunset over the ocean. It would have been a beautiful view to enjoy on the last night of vacation. But now it was overshadowed by my son's betrayal and the prospect of a long flight tomorrow. I didn't bother to call Hezekiah to inform her of my early return. Let it be a surprise. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized I knew about his deception. Already lying in bed, I remembered how long ago, when Hezekiah was 15, I had caught him lying about where he was after school. He swore he was at the library, but a neighbor saw him at the mall with a group of boys known for their bad behavior. I didn't punish him right away. Instead, I waited until he calmed down, convinced he'd gotten away with his lies. And then, over dinner, I calmly presented the evidence of his deception and announced the consequences. No fun for a month, extra household chores, and a daily report of his whereabouts. The lesson was harsh but effective. Hezekiah was a paragon of honesty for a long time afterward. Apparently, with age, my memory fails not only me, but him as well. Well, it's time to remind him that some lessons need repeating. With those thoughts, I closed my eyes, preparing for an early rise. Tomorrow I'll be home, and then all the uninvited guests will have to face the lady of the house, and it would be an encounter they would remember for a long time. The cab from the Las Vegas airport to Boulder City cost me an obscene amount of money, but I was too tired and irritated to save money. The 8-hour flight with a layover in Los Angeles had left me in a state of apathetic rage, if such a combination was even possible. I hadn't slept in over 24 hours, but the adrenaline of my son's betrayal and the need for immediate action kept me awake. The driver, a silent, middle-aged man with graying hair, glanced at me occasionally in the rearview mirror. He was probably wondering what an old lady with an expensive suitcase was doing in a cab at 4 o'clock on a weekday afternoon. "Tough flight?" he finally asked. "You could say that," I answered dryly, not wanting to keep the conversation going. "You're coming back from vacation?" "Yes, early, I guess." He looked at me in the mirror again. I looked at him with ill-concealed irritation. "Family emergency," I cut him off. "I prefer not to discuss it with outsiders." The driver shrugged slightly and made no further attempt to speak to me. The rest of the trip was blessedly quiet, except for the soft jazz coming from the radio. When we finally turned onto my street, I could tell Gloria hadn't been exaggerating. There were 3 unfamiliar cars in the driveway in front of my house, and several more parked at the curb. Among them, I recognized Hezekiah's shabby Ford. The blood rushed to my face, and I felt my fists clench. "Pull over here," I said to the driver as we approached the house on the opposite side of the street. I didn't want the noise of the cab pulling up to alert them to my arrival. After paying the driver and tipping him handsomely, I waited for him to leave and cross the street, rolling my suitcase behind me. As I approached the house, I heard loud music and laughter coming from the open windows. My rage was at its peak, but I'd always been a woman in control of my emotions, and I wasn't about to let go of that principle now. The front door was unlocked, another violation of my rules. I entered as quietly as I could, leaving my suitcase in the hallway. There were voices and laughter coming from the living room, the sounds of some show on TV. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked into the living room. The picture before my eyes was like something out of a nightmare. My impeccably furnished home, my pride and joy, had turned into a chaotic dormitory. On my antique sofa, imported from France, 2 teenagers were sprawled out with their phones. On the mahogany coffee table were glasses of drinks without coasters. Snack wrappers lay on the floor. But worst of all were the people. There were a lot of them, more than I could count at a glance. Adults, teenagers, children, all with the same distinctive West Virginia accent I'd recognize anywhere. The Prue family in full force. For a moment, Everyone froze, noticing my appearance. Then the uncertain voice of one of the women called out, "Hezekiah, someone's here." My son appeared from the kitchen, towel in hand, and a look of slight irritation on his face. When he saw me, he turned pale and the towel fell out of his hands. Mommy? What are you? I thought you were in Hawaii. Apparently, I'm back. My voice was icy. Why don't you tell me what's going on here? There was a sepulchral silence in the room. The teenagers on the couch froze, not even daring to look up from their phones. Through the kitchen door, I saw Prue standing at the stove with a cook stove in her hand, her face as pale as my son's. Hezekiah took a step forward, his hands nervously rubbing the edges of his shirt. "Mom, look, I can explain everything." I sincerely hope so. I took off my hat and gloves, looking around the room. Because right now, I feel like my house has become some kind of dormitory for your wife's family. "Mrs. Penrose," came the voice of Prue, who came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "We weren't expecting you so early." Obviously. I gave her a cold look. "Let me ask you, what are all these people doing in my house?" "This is my family." Prue looked nervous but tried to remain calm. "We've had some circumstances." "What exactly are the circumstances that justify invading my home against my clear instructions?" I turned to Hezekiah. I was very clear, no intruders in the house. Hezekiah looked like a schoolboy caught stealing. His shoulders slumped, and his gaze darted around the room, avoiding my eyes. "It's only temporary, Mom. The Prue family was having trouble finding a place to live. Their house in West Virginia. It's been hit by a flood." "Flood," I said the word hesitantly. "When did that happen?" "2 weeks ago," Prue interjected. "The entire first floor is flooded. The insurance covers the repairs, but it's going to take time. My parents and sisters and their families just had nowhere to go." I looked around the room, counting the people present. 2 older men, obviously Prue's parents. 3 women, probably her sisters. Men, presumably their husbands. And children of various ages. "And how many people live in my house now?" I asked, already knowing the answer thanks to Gloria. Prue and Hezekiah exchanged quick glances. 17. Hezekiah finally answered, "Including the children." 17. I repeated, feeling my rage rising. 17 strangers in my house without my permission. "They're not strangers, Mom." Hezekiah tried to justify himself. "They are Prue's family. You met them at the wedding. I barely remember the faces of the people I met yesterday, and you expect me to remember all the guests from your wedding 8 years ago?" I shook my head. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is that you violated my trust and my clear instructions." One of the younger women, probably Prue's sister, rose from her chair. "Perhaps we should leave." She addressed Prue in an uncertain voice. "And where are you going to go, Rachel?" Prue replied sharply. "With 2 kids and no money?" I raised my hand, interrupting this exchange of remarks. "No one's going anywhere until I get a handle on the situation." I turned to Hezekiah. "Show me where all these people are sleeping. I want to see what damage has been done to my house." Hezekiah nodded, looking both relieved and scared at the same time. "Of course, Mom. Let's go." We went up to the second floor, leaving Prue and her relatives in tense silence. Already on the stairs, I noticed spill marks on the carpet and scratches on the banister. "We sleep in the guest bedroom," Hezekiah said, pointing to the first door on the right. "Prue's parents are in your room." "My bedroom?" I nearly choked with indignation. "You put strangers in my bedroom?" "They're the oldest, Mom. They needed a comfortable bed." Hezekiah spoke quickly, as if hoping the speed of speech would soften the blow. "We changed all the linens, of course." "Of course," I repeated sarcastically. "Go on." Prue's sisters and their husbands are in the other bedrooms. The kids sleep in sleeping bags in the study and living room. I silently opened each door, looking around the rooms. My perfectly organized house had turned into a chaotic refugee camp. Strangers' personal belongings were strewn across every surface, cheap makeup on my dressers, candy wrappers lying on my bedside tables. But worst of all was my own bedroom, my sanctuary. My private space where everything had its place was now filled with other people's smells and things. On my dresser was a picture I'd never seen before, a smiling couple against a rural backdrop. Prue's parents had put their pictures in my bedroom. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the rising anger. "How long have they been here?" I asked, not looking at my son. 10 days, he answered after a pause. "They arrived the day after you left, so it was planned in advance. They were waiting for me to leave. My trip to Hawaii was the perfect opportunity for them." "How long are they planning on staying?" I finally turned to Hezekiah. He looked away, unable to look me in the eye. "We don't know for sure. Renovating their house will take time, maybe a few more weeks, maybe a month." "A month?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation. "Did you really think you could keep this from me for a month? We were going to clean everything up and get the house in order before you got back." Hezekiah sounded like a child caught in an obvious lie. "We didn't expect you to be back so early." "Obviously." I looked around the bedroom again. "Let's go back downstairs. I want to talk to everyone." When we returned to the living room, there was a tense silence. Prue stood in the center of the room as if preparing for battle. Her parents sat on the couch with a guilty look. The rest of the family was talking quietly, some of them already starting to pack their things. "May I have everyone's attention?" I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I need to get something straight." Everyone stopped talking and turned to me. I could feel the stares on me, wary, frightened, some even defiant. "My name is Abigail Penrose. This is my home. I did not authorize any of you to be here. Furthermore, I have made it clear to my son that I do not wish to have strangers in my home during my absence." One of Prue's sisters, a tall woman with bright red hair, crossed her arms over her chest. "We are not outsiders. We are family." "You're Prue's family, not mine," I replied coldly. "And that doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that you're trespassing on my private property." "Mom, please," Hezekiah intervened. "They are in a difficult situation. Their house flooded. They had no other options." "There are always other options." I looked at him with disappointment. "Hotels, rentals, friends. Boulder City isn't the only place on earth where you can find a roof over your head." "But it would cost a lot," Prue said. "My family is having financial difficulties right now because of the flooding. We thought you thought you could take advantage of my absence and my home without asking permission." I finished for her. "Call it what you want, but it's basically trespassing." There was a heavy silence. Prue's parents looked embarrassed. The other adults looked annoyed or guilty in varying degrees. The kids just seemed confused. I paused, weighing my options. I could demand that everyone leave my house immediately. That would be my right. But then I thought, what would be the point? It would give them the opportunity to portray me as an angry, heartless old woman who threw my poor relatives out on the street. Hezekiah would probably leave with them, and our relationship would be ruined for good. No, there was a better way to handle this situation, a way that would give me satisfaction and teach everyone involved in this little conspiracy a lesson. "Well," I finally said, surprising everyone with my calm tone, "the situation is difficult, but not hopeless. I realize that families need to support each other in times of need." A wave of surprise ran across the faces of those present. Prue looked wary. Hezekiah looked incredulous and hopeful. "Really?" he asked cautiously. "Of course. I even forced myself to smile. After all, this is a big house. There's plenty of room for everyone, for the time being, while the housing problems are being worked out. The tension in the room eased considerably. Prue's mother, a woman about my age but looking older, sighed with relief. That's very generous of you, Mrs. Penrose. However, I continued, raising my hand, I have a few conditions, and that's when I saw Prue tense up. She knew me better than the others, and probably realized that my sudden yielding could not be sincere. First of all, everyone will be moving out of my bedroom tomorrow. I'll sleep in my own bed. Of course, Hezekiah quickly agreed. Prue's parents can move into my office. Secondly, I looked around the living room, noting all the signs of disorder. It is necessary to establish the rules of residence: cleanliness, order, quiet after 10 p.m., no parties, no alcohol, and all adults will participate in cleaning and cooking. Some of the young people looked disgruntled, but no one objected. And finally, I paused for effect. I want to know exactly when you all plan to move out. I need a specific deadline. Prue and her parents exchanged glances. We hope to have the renovations completed within a month. Prue's father, an older man with a gray beard and tired eyes, finally said, but it's hard to say for sure. A month, I repeated. Good, 1 month from today. No more. Thank you, Mom. Hezekiah looked genuinely grateful, which touched me a little, despite my anger. You have no idea how much this means to all of us. You're right, I thought. I don't. Just like you have no idea what I'm really up to. Now, if you don't mind, I said, turning toward the stairs, I'd like to rest after my long flight. Hezekiah, please bring in my suitcase. As I walked up the stairs, I could feel the stares of everyone present on me. They were probably surprised by my reaction. Perhaps Prue had warned them about my difficult character, and now everyone was confused by my unexpected generosity. Let them think what they want. My ostensible humility would give me time to study the situation and prepare a suitable response to this trespass. Once I was in the guest bedroom where Hezekiah had moved my things, I finally allowed myself to exhale. The jet lag was wearing off, but my mind kept working, analyzing the situation and planning my next steps. When Hezekiah came out, I opened my suitcase and pulled out a small notebook and pen. I began to write down the names of everyone I could remember and their relationship to each other. I needed to know who I was dealing with: Prue, her parents, 3 sisters with their husbands and children, 17 people in all, uninvited guests in my house, people who thought they could take advantage of my absence and the kindness of my naive son. I turned the page and wrote the heading, The Plan. Underneath it, I began to jot down points, ideas that came to my mind. I needed to know everyone's daily routine: who leaves when, who comes back late, who is responsible for the children, who was in charge of this little colony that had settled in my house. When I have enough information, I can act. And when I do, they'll regret the day they decided to take advantage of my hospitality without permission. I closed the notebook and tucked it into the pocket of my robe. Then I went to the window, looking out at my manicured garden, which now looked a little neglected. 10 days without my supervision, and already there were signs of neglect. What would happen in a month's time? Downstairs, I could hear muffled voices, the family discussing my unexpected arrival and my strange reaction. Let them talk. Let them think they tricked me. Their smugness would only make my final blow sweeter. I lay back on the bed, feeling my body protest the unaccustomed fatigue. Tomorrow I will begin my silent investigation. I will observe, listen, memorize. I will learn everything I need to know about the 17 uninvited guests in my home, and then I will teach them a lesson they will never forget. I spent the next 3 days observing the Prue family like a naturalist observes a colony of ants. I recorded their habits, their schedules, their relationships. My small notebook gradually filled with notes: who went to work when, who watched the kids, who cooked, who cleaned. Prue's parents, Sylvia and Eugene Baxter, appeared to be a relatively quiet couple in their 60s. Sylvia spent most of the day in the kitchen cooking for the whole bunch. Eugene mostly sat in the living room in front of the TV, occasionally going out to the backyard to smoke. Neither of them seemed to be working. According to Prue, they were both retired. Prue's three sisters turned out to be very different personalities. Rachel, the youngest, was a single mom with two naughty boys, ages 5 and 7. She worked remotely, constantly sitting at her laptop in the corner of the living room, and occasionally yelled at her children. The middle sister, Lizzie, with her husband Nate and teenage daughter, seemed the most balanced of the family. She worked as a nurse at a local clinic and often returned late. The older sister, Violet, with husband Tim and three children of varying ages, was the loudest and most bossy. She was the one who seemed to run the whole chaotic household in Prue's absence. Prue and Hezekiah lived their normal lives: work, coming home, dinner. But I noticed how tense my son looked, as if expecting me to snap at any moment and kick everyone out into the street. He tried to be especially attentive to me, often asking if I needed anything, as if trying to make it up to me. By the end of the third day, I noticed a pattern. On weekday evenings, some family members were absent. Some were late at work. Some were out with friends. But on Friday night, everyone would gather at the house for a family dinner. It was a tradition that they obviously honored even before moving into my house. "We're having a big family dinner on Friday," Sylvia told me as I helped her with the dishes on Thursday night. "Will you be joining us, Mrs. Penrose?" I gave her the fakest smile in my arsenal. "Of course, Sylvia. I'd love to spend time with your family." She looked surprised by my answer, but pleased. In the few days I'd spent watching them, I'd been careful to maintain the image of a resigned older lady. I was polite, keeping to myself, but not overtly hostile. And my strategy worked. They relaxed, less cautious in my presence. "That's great," Sylvia smiled. "I'll make my signature macaroni and cheese casserole. The kids love it. Macaroni and cheese casserole. In my home, where I served sophisticated French and Italian cuisine when I hosted receptions." I held back a sigh and nodded with fake enthusiasm. I looked forward to it. When Sylvia turned away, I let the smile disappear from my face. Family dinner on Friday. All 17 people in one place at one time. It was exactly the opportunity I'd been waiting for. Secluded in my room, I pulled out my phone and opened the search engine. I needed a 24-hour locksmith service that could come on a Friday night and quickly replace all the locks in the house. After a few minutes of searching, I found the right company, Express Locks, which promised to arrive within 30 minutes at any time of the day or night. I dialed their number and spoke in a low voice so I wouldn't be heard at the door. "Good afternoon. I need the locks in my house changed as a matter of urgency." "Of course, ma'am," a man's voice answered. "When is a good time for you?" "Friday night around 9 o'clock. Is that possible?" "Yes, we work around the clock. Do you need to change all the locks or just the front lock?" "All of them," I answered firmly. "I have 4 exterior doors, front, back, and 2 side doors. I want all of them to have new locks with 1 key." "I see. It will cost about $400, including the cost of the locks and labor. The price is fine with me. I wasn't going to skimp on my revenge. I also want it done as quickly and quietly as possible. It's a surprise." There was a pause, and I could almost hear the man on the other end of the line, wondering if I was about to do something illegal. "Ma'am, we're not involved in—" "This is my own home," I interrupted him. "I can show proof of ownership. I'm just having a problem with some of my guests abusing my hospitality." That was essentially true, and the man seemed to accept my explanation. In that case, we can help you. Let's make an appointment for 9 o'clock on Friday night. We will need your address and contact number. I provided the necessary information and ended the call, feeling satisfaction growing inside. The first part of the plan was in motion. Next, I needed to deal with the electricity. Fortunately, I had a longtime acquaintance, Roger Clark, an electrician who had serviced my home for over 15 years. I trusted him and knew he wouldn't ask too many questions. I waited until the house was quieter. Most of the adults had gone to work. The kids were playing in the yard under Sylvia's supervision and called Roger. Abigail! His voice sounded surprised. I haven't heard from you in a while. Did something happen to the wiring? Not exactly, Roger. I have a unusual request. I explained the situation to him in general terms. Uninvited guests, trespassing, needing to be taught a lesson. Roger, who knew me well enough to understand my character, listened without interrupting. So you want me to turn off the power at a certain time? That's right, Friday night around 9. And I need it to stay off indefinitely. That's not exactly standard service, Abigail. He sounded doubtful. I'll pay double, I said firmly. And this is my house, Roger. I have the right to control my communications. After a brief pause, he agreed. Good. I can turn off the main switch and lock it down. But you'll need to call me when you want the power restored. That's exactly what I need. Thank you, Roger. The next item on my list was water. That was easier. I knew where the main water supply valve for the house was. It was in the basement, behind an old bookcase that I could push aside. A few turns of the valve and the water would stop flowing to all the taps and toilets. There was one last item left, a place I could go after I put my plan into action. Obviously, staying in the house would be unwise. I needed a quiet, secluded hotel nearby where I could wait it out for a few days until my lesson was learned. I did a little research and settled on the Boulder Dam Hotel, a historic building turned boutique hotel just a short drive from my home. I booked a room for 3 nights starting Friday, using my middle name and maiden name to check in so that Hezekiah couldn't find me if he looked for me. When all the arrangements were finalized, I felt strangely calm. The plan was simple but effective. Disconnecting all communications and changing the locks would create an extremely uncomfortable situation for my uninvited guests. No electricity, no water, no ability to get in and out of the house freely. It wouldn't just be an inconvenience. It would be a real lesson in the consequences of violating other people's boundaries. I went downstairs to check out what was going on in the house. In the living room, I found Violet, Prue's older sister, sprawled out on my antique couch with her feet up on the coffee table. Oh, Mrs. Penrose. She didn't even bother to take her feet off the table. I haven't seen you since this morning. I had things to do, I replied in a neutral tone. I see you've, made yourself comfortable. Yeah, this couch is awesome. She patted the upholstery. Must have cost a fortune. It's 19th century French, I said dryly. And yes, it did cost a fortune. Violet just shrugged, clearly unimpressed. Well, it's certainly more comfortable than the junk we have at home. I felt anger building up inside me, but I held it back. A few more days, and I'd be able to say what I thought of that woman and her attitude toward other people's property. I'm glad you're comfortable. I smiled my most fake smile. By the way, where are the kids? Out in the yard, playing with the garden hose. She waved toward the back door. Mom's watching them. My heart squeezed. My immaculately tended garden. My prize roses. With a garden hose? I interjected, trying to remain calm. I hope they won't damage the plants. Violet looked at me with mild irritation. Relax, Mrs. Penrose. They're just kids playing in the water. What could possibly happen? I didn't bother to answer, instead heading for the back door. As I stepped out onto the terrace, I saw a picture that took my breath away. Three children, Rachel's two boys and Violet's youngest daughter, were chasing each other with a garden hose, watering everything around them. The ground had been turned into a muddy mess. Several rose bushes had been knocked over, and the tulip beds had been completely trampled. Sylvia was sitting on a garden chair, calmly watching the destruction of my garden. When she saw me, she waved her hand. Kids have so much fun, don't they? I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. 20 years I'd grown this garden. Some of my roses were rare varieties I'd ordered from Europe. They're destroying my garden, I said in a quiet but firm voice. Sylvia finally noticed my anger and got up from her chair. Children, stop messing around with the water. Come here. The children reluctantly obeyed, throwing the hose right into the bed of irises. But Grandma, we're just getting started, protested one of Rachel's boys. Mrs. Penrose is worried about her flowers, said Sylvia, trying to sound stern but not too successful. Come inside and I'll get you some ice cream. The children ran into the house with joyful shouts, leaving behind them muddy footprints on my perfectly clean terrace. Sylvia turned to me with a guilty smile. I'm sorry, Mrs. Penrose. Children are children, you know. My son never destroyed gardens, even when he was a child, I replied coldly. It's a matter of parenting, Sylvia. Her smile faded, but she said nothing, just followed the children into the house. I was left alone in the middle of the ruined garden, feeling my patience thinning by the minute. This family wasn't just occupying my house, they were destroying it, treating it with disdain, believing they had the right to ruin what I had built and cherished over the years. My plan of revenge no longer seemed too harsh. On the contrary, I was beginning to think it wasn't harsh enough. That evening, when everyone was gathered for dinner, and the dining room now resembled a school cafeteria with extra chairs and noisy children, I watched this strange family with detached interest. They were loud, intemperate, constantly interrupting each other. And yet there was a kind of genuine warmth in their interactions that I rarely saw in my own family. Hezekiah sat next to Prue, occasionally casting concerned glances at me. He was still expecting me to snap at any moment and kick everyone out the door. Poor naive boy. He didn't realize I was planning something much more subtle. Now, Mrs. Penrose, Tim, Violet's husband, a large man with a thick beard, said to me, Hezekiah tells me you've been to Hawaii. How did you like it there? It was informative, I answered guardedly, although my stay was shorter than planned. Yes, we were all surprised when you came back so suddenly, Violet interjected with a nasty grin. Such luck for us. I ignored her sarcasm and continued eating. The dish Sylvia had prepared was exactly what I'd expected, a cheese and spice-laden casserole that tasted like salty rubber. But I ate in silence, not showing my disgust. Tomorrow's the big day, Prue said, obviously trying to change the subject. Our traditional family dinner on Friday. We usually do something special. Yeah, it's been our tradition since the kids were little, Sylvia added with a nostalgic smile. Everyone gets together, no one works late, no plans for the evening, just family. Sounds nice, I remarked, raising my water glass. I'm looking forward to tomorrow night, and that was the plain truth. I was really looking forward to Friday, though for completely different reasons than they might have guessed. The next day passed in intense anticipation. I checked and double-checked every detail of my plan, called the locksmith service to confirm their arrival. I made sure Roger hadn't forgotten about our arrangement, packed a small bag with the necessary items for the hotel stay, wrote the note I was going to leave for my uninvited guests. By Friday evening, the house began to fill with people. Those who worked were returning earlier than usual. The children were excited about the upcoming family dinner. Sylvia and the other women were busy in the kitchen, preparing some sort of grand multi-course feast. I kept a calm demeanor, even helping with the table setting, smiling and making small talk. No one suspected that inside I was like a wound up spring, ready to be unleashed at any moment. At 8 o'clock in the evening, everyone gathered around the big table. I sat in my usual place at the head of the table, watching the rowdy family enjoy the food and each other's company. Hezekiah looked relaxed for the first time in many days. Perhaps he had decided that I had come to terms with the situation and was even beginning to accept his new family. At 9:30, I apologized and went upstairs, saying I needed to take my medicine. Instead, I took my already packed bag, hidden under the bed, and quietly went down the back stairs. No one noticed my disappearance. Everyone was too engrossed in dessert and loud conversations. I went out the back door and walked quickly to my neighbor's house, where I had arranged in advance with Gloria to call a cab for me. The car was already waiting for me, and 15 minutes later I was at the hotel, checking into my room overlooking Lake Mead. At exactly 9 o'clock, I called Roger. "Are you ready?" he asked without preamble. "Absolutely," I replied. "Good. I'll cut the power in 5 minutes. Are the locksmiths there yet?" "They should be." I checked the time. "I asked them to be here by 9. "Good luck, Abigail." Roger sounded a little worried. "I hope you know what you're doing." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing, Roger. Thank you for your help." I ended the call and sat in the chair by the window, imagining what was happening in my house right now. Suddenly, the lights went out. Confusion, exclamations of surprise, attempts to find out what had happened. Hezekiah probably went to check the electrical panel. And then there was a knock on the door. Locksmiths coming to change the locks. I pictured Prue and Hezekiah's faces when they realized what was going on. When they find my note left on the kitchen table, "Dear uninvited guests, welcome to your quarantine. The electricity has been cut off. The water will soon be shut off as well. All locks have been changed. No one gets in or out for the next few days. Consider this a lesson in the importance of respecting other people's boundaries and property. When the lesson has been learned, we will discuss the terms of your release. Best wishes, mistress of the house." I smiled at my thoughts and ordered a bottle of good wine into the room. Revenge is best served cold, and my revenge had been thought out to the smallest detail. Now all that was left to do was wait for the results. Friday came with an inevitability that I felt almost physically. Every minute brought closer the moment of my carefully planned revenge, and I could barely contain my nervous excitement, hiding behind a mask of indifference. The day was unusually lively. The Prue family was scurrying around the house, preparing for the evening's festivities. Sylvia had been in the kitchen since morning, occasionally sending one of the household to the store for missing ingredients. Violet and Rachel were decorating the living room with homemade garlands. Apparently, the traditional Friday night dinner was something of a weekly celebration for them. "We always celebrate the end of the work week," Lizzie, Prue's middle sister, explained to me when she noticed my gaze fixed on the commotion. "It started when we were kids. Dad would get a week's paycheck and Mom would cook something special. Now, it's just a tradition." I nodded with feigned interest, thinking about how tonight would be special for them in a very different way. My bag was long ago packed and hidden under the bed. I checked everything 3 times: documents, money, a change of clothes, toiletries, medication. Everything I needed for a few days stay at the hotel. I also made a few final calls, confirming arrangements. "Mr. Jenkins, this is Abigail Penrose. I'm calling about changing the locks today." "Yes, Mrs. Penrose," the locksmith answered me. "We'll be at your place at 9:01 like we said." "That's fine. I'll be waiting for you at the back door. Remember, this is a delicate matter, so no doorbells or loud conversations." "I understand, ma'am. We'll be as discreet as possible." Then I called Roger, my electrician, to make sure he hadn't forgotten our arrangement. "It's all set, Abigail," he assured me. "I'll turn off the power at 9 sharp, just like you asked. But I'm still not sure that's—" "Thank you, Roger," I interrupted him. I appreciate your help and won't forget it. The last call was to the hotel to confirm the reservation. Yes, Ms. Wooster. The receptionist answered, using my middle name that I had provided when making the reservation. Your room is ready. You can check in any time after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Everything was ready. All that remained was to wait for the evening and the moment when everyone would gather in one place. By 6 o'clock, the house was filled with the aromas of food cooking and the sounds of family members returning from work. Tim, Violet's husband, brought several bottles of wine. Nate, Lizzie's husband, returned with bags of chips and other snacks. The kids were running around the house with excited screams. I watched it all with a mixture of disgust and gloating anticipation. They were so sure of their right to be here, so comfortable in my house. Today, that confidence would be shattered. At 7:30, Sylvia announced that dinner was almost ready and asked everyone to help set the table. I volunteered to set the candles for atmosphere, as I said with a smile. No one suspected that they would need the candles very soon for a very different reason. At 8 o'clock, everyone gathered around the table. I took my seat as usual at the head of the table, looking around at this noisy company. Hezekiah sat across from me, at the other end, with Prue on his right hand. The rest of the family sat along the long sides of the table. The children sat at a separate kids' table, set up in the corner of the dining room. Before we begin, said Eugene, Prue's father, raising his wine glass, I would like to make a toast to our hospitable hostess, Mrs. Penrose, who has so graciously welcomed us into her beautiful home. Everyone raised their glasses, looking at me with expressions ranging from sincere, like Sylvia's, to downright cynical, like Violet's. To Mrs. Penrose, they said in unison, "Thank you." I smiled my most fake smile. As they say, family is the most important thing. Hezekiah gave me a surprised look. In all his years, he had rarely heard such sentimental phrases from me. I carefully avoided his eyes, afraid he might see the gloating lurking in them. Dinner began in the typical manner of this family loudly, chaotically, with constant requests to pass this or that dish, with shouting and laughter. I ate in silence, maintaining a polite smile and occasionally glancing at my watch. At 8:30, I excused myself and rose from the table. I apologize, but I need to take my medicine, I said, addressing everyone at once and no one in particular. Go on without me. I'll be right back. No one paid much attention to my absence. Everyone was too busy eating and talking. I went upstairs to my temporary bedroom, closed the door quietly, and pulled my pre-packed bag from under the bed. Then I put on a light cloak, even though the evening was warm, not to protect me from the cold, but to hide the bag I slung over my shoulder. I left the room and walked carefully down the back stairs, which were seldom used and led directly to the back door. The noise of the family dinner came from the dining room, but it was quiet here on the far side of the house. Before I left, I glanced into the kitchen and placed a pre-written note on the table. The piece of paper with my impeccable handwriting lay in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. Quietly opening the back door, I slipped out into the garden. The evening air was filled with the scent of blooming roses, the few that had survived the invasion of Prue's children. I looked around, making sure no one could see me, and took a quick step toward the garden gate that led to the neighboring street. Gloria, my neighbor, was already waiting for me as we'd agreed. Abigail, she whispered, peering out from behind the hedge. Everything going according to plan? Yes, I answered quietly. Did you call a cab? It's here, waiting around the corner like you asked. Thank you, Gloria. I owe you one. I quickly crossed her courtyard and went to a parallel street where a cab was indeed waiting. The driver, a young man with a Bluetooth earpiece, nodded to me as I got into the back seat. Boulder Dam Hotel, please, I said, and the car moved off. I looked at my watch, 8:50. Everything was running right on schedule. The drive to the hotel took about 10 minutes. I paid the driver with a generous tip and entered the historic building, built in the 30s for engineers working on the Hoover Dam. "Good evening," the young man at the front desk greeted me. "What can I do for you?" "I have a reservation under the name of Worcester." "Yes, Ms. Worcester?" He checked the computer. "A Lakeview room for 3 nights. May I see some identification?" I held out my driver's license to him, hoping he wouldn't notice the difference in last names. Fortunately, the young man only glanced at the photo, nodded, and handed the document back to me. "It's all right. Here's your key, number 205 on the second floor. The elevator is to the right of the desk. Would you like some help with your luggage?" "No, thank you, I'm fine." I took the key card and headed for the elevator. The room was exactly what I expected: spacious, old-fashioned, with large windows overlooking Lake Mead. I set my bag on the bed and pulled out my cell phone. It was exactly 9 o'clock. I dialed Roger's number. "It's time," I said as soon as he answered. "Are you sure, Abigail?" I could hear the doubt in his voice again. "Absolutely, do it. I will, shutting it down right now." I imagined what was happening in my house right now. Sudden darkness, panic, confusion. Hezekiah is probably trying to figure out what happened to the electricity. He's probably already on his way to the basement to check the electrical panel. I dialed the locksmith service number next. "Mr. Jenkins, this is Abigail Penrose. Are you all set?" "Yes, ma'am. We're on our way to your house. We'll be there in 3 minutes." "Oh, that's great. I told you there'd be no power. Start at the back door. It's not in use right now." "Got it. Do you have flashlights or candles for lighting?" "There are candles in the house, and I left a lantern on the back porch for you." Act quickly and quietly. I ended the call and took a deep breath. The plan was in motion. Now all that was left to do was wait and watch. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to do so. The day before, I had installed several wireless surveillance cameras in my house, disguised as ordinary objects: the clock in the living room, the statue on the mantelpiece, the picture frame in the dining room. The cameras were battery operated and didn't depend on electricity in the house. They transmitted the signal to my tablet via cellular internet. I took the tablet out of my bag and launched an app to view the broadcast from the cameras. The screen appeared divided into 4 parts: the living room, dining room, hallway, and kitchen. In the living room and dining room, I could see flickering lights, candles they had obviously lit after the lights went out. In the dining room, I saw the Baxter family clustered around the table, illuminated by the warm glow of the candles. Hezekiah was not among them. He had probably already gone to check the electrical panel. The children looked frightened, the adults worried. Prue stood with her arms crossed over her chest, saying something to the others, though I couldn't hear what she was saying. The cameras were only transmitting images without sound. A few minutes later, Hezekiah returned to the dining room. Even without sound, it was clear that he was upset and puzzled. He was waving his hands around, explaining something to the others. Apparently, he couldn't figure out what had happened with the electricity. At that time, on another screen showing the hallway, I saw the faint glow of a flashlight flickering by the back door. The locksmiths had arrived and had already begun their work. They acted quickly and professionally, just as I had requested. I switched back to the dining room. Some movement had started there. Eugene and Tim had apparently decided to go outside to see if the neighbors were having electrical problems. They headed toward the front door, and I held my breath. If they came out now, they might discover the locksmiths early. But I was lucky they lingered in the hallway, apparently discussing something with Hezekiah. In that time, the locksmiths had finished with the back door and moved on to the side door, which was not visible from the cameras. About 15 minutes had passed. On the tablet screen, I could see the unease in the house growing. Prue was no longer standing still. She was pacing around the dining room with her phone in her hand, apparently trying to call someone. probably calling me, but my phone was off. The children were getting cranky. One of Rachel's boys was having a real tantrum and had to be taken upstairs. Sylvia was trying to stay calm, but even through the camera, you could see her nervously rubbing the edge of her blouse. Finally, I saw Eugene and Tim heading for the front door. This time, they actually tried to get out. Eugene turned the knob, but the door wouldn't open. He tried again, with more effort, then started yelling something, judging by the look on his face. There was a real panic in the dining hall. Everyone jumped up from their seats and piled into the hallway. Hezekiah tried to open the door with his key, but the new lock obviously wouldn't budge. I switched to the camera in the kitchen and saw Violet discover my note on the table. She unfolded the piece of paper, read it by candlelight, and her face changed. She ran out into the dining room, waving the note, and everyone crowded around her. I couldn't hear their words, but the reaction was more eloquent than any sound. Shock, disbelief, anger, all of these emotions reflected on their faces as they realized they were caught in a trap. Prue snatched the note from her sister and reread it, then turned to Hezekiah with an expression of rage on her face. Poor Hezekiah looked completely lost. He couldn't seem to believe that his own mother had arranged such an elaborate revenge. But I knew my son. Soon shock would be replaced by anger, and then perhaps understanding. After all, I hadn't wasted so many years teaching him respect for other people's boundaries and property. Now, the real commotion began. Men rushed to check all the exits of the house. Women were comforting frightened children. Prue tried to call the emergency services, apparently, but I was sure her attempts would be unsuccessful. Without a specific threat to life, the police were unlikely to break down the doors of a private home just because its owner had decided to teach uninvited guests a lesson. Besides, there was food in the house, there was still water in the pipes for a while, and children and the elderly were not in danger. It was discomfort, not life-threatening. I leaned back on the pillows of the hotel bed, feeling strangely satisfied with what was happening. The plan had worked even better than I had expected. Of course, I realized that the consequences would be serious. Hezekiah might never forgive me for this, but sometimes a lesson has to be brutal to be remembered. I continued to watch what was happening in the house for about another hour. Gradually, the initial panic began to subside. They seemed to realize that they couldn't get out immediately and began to organize a temporary living arrangement in their new environment. Sylvia was gathering candles from around the house. Lizzie was putting the younger children to bed. The men were sitting in the living room, apparently discussing options. Hezekiah and Prue separated from the others and went into the kitchen. I saw them arguing fiercely, glancing occasionally at my note, which was now lying on the kitchen table. Hezekiah looked defeated. Prue looked furious. Around 11 o'clock, the activity in the house began to quiet down. Most of the candles went out, leaving only a few dim lights in the living room and kitchen. People gradually retired to their bedrooms, resigned to the fact that nothing would change tonight. I turned off the tablet, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and slight regret. Perhaps my revenge had been too harsh, but they'd violated my boundaries, taken advantage of my absence, occupied my home without permission. Such things shouldn't go without consequences. I went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I imagined what Hezekiah was feeling right now. Anger, fear, shame. Does he finally realize exactly what he did wrong? With these thoughts, I spent a restless night, waking up periodically to check the camera feed. The house remained dark and quiet. My captors had apparently decided to wait until morning before taking any further action. In the morning, I ordered breakfast for the room and turned on my tablet again. On the screen, I saw the Baxter family slowly waking up to conditions they were clearly not used to. Without electricity, the coffee maker, toaster, and microwave didn't work. Water probably wasn't flowing from the taps anymore, And worst of all, for modern people, there was no internet and no way to charge phones. I watched their growing discomfort with a feeling that could be called schadenfreude if I were a less reserved woman. They were reaping the rewards of their disrespect for other people's property, and the lesson appeared to be painful. Throughout the day, I checked the broadcast periodically and saw the tension building in the house. Arguments began. Violet and Prue were yelling at each other in the kitchen, waving their arms around. The children were cranky without their usual entertainment. The men tried unsuccessfully to find a way to get out of the house or restore communications. By the evening of the second day of quarantine, it was obvious that my tactics were working. The Baxter family looked exhausted and demoralized. They sat in the living room by the light of the last candles, clearly discussing the situation. Hezekiah held my note in his hands, rereading it over and over as if trying to find hidden meaning in it. I decided it was time to take the next step. Tomorrow I would return home and set conditions for them. They would either accept them and leave my house with an apology, or, well, I had other options. With that thought, I was finally able to fall into a restful sleep, feeling like I had control of the situation back in my hands for the first time in days. 7 days was exactly how long I had allowed the quarantine to last. 7 days without electricity, without running water, without being able to freely go in and out of the house. 7 days for my uninvited guests to feel the consequences of their disrespect for other people's property. I've been watching through the cameras all week. The first 2 days were filled with panic and anger. They tried to get out in every way possible, breaking locks, yelling out the windows, trying to call the police. By the third day, humility set in. By the sixth day, attempts at negotiation began. Hezekiah found a way to send me a message. He wrote in big letters on a piece of paper and taped it to the window. "Mom, please let's talk." On the seventh day, they looked defeated, dirty, tired, thirsty, and discomfited. It was time to wrap up this lesson. I checked out of the hotel early in the morning, took a cab, and asked the driver to stop a block away from my house. I pulled a new set of keys out of my purse and opened the front door. The smell immediately hit my nostrils, a mixture of unwashed bodies, stale air, and spoiled food. Everyone in the living room fell silent at my appearance. 17 pairs of eyes stared at me, with emotions ranging from fear to rage. They looked as I expected after a week without normalcy: unkempt, sunken eyes, crumpled clothes. "Good morning," I said calmly. "I hope the week of quarantine has given you a chance to reflect on the importance of respecting other people's boundaries." Hezekiah rose from the couch, his face pale and drained. "Mother, how could you do that? The same way you could violate my trust and put 17 people in my house without permission. Every action has consequences." Prue stood up too, her eyes sparkling with anger. "You are insane, keeping us locked up with no water or electricity. Children here, elderly people, but no one was hurt," I pointed out. "You had food, water in the tubs, a roof over your head. All I took away was comfort that you weren't entitled to in the first place." "We'll call the police," Tim, Violet's husband, intervened. "Go ahead, explain to the officers why you were living illegally in my house. I will provide videotapes showing you defacing my property." Eugene, Prue's father, slowly rose from his chair. "We've learned our lesson, Mrs. Penrose. Now please get the electricity and water back on so we can pack up and leave with dignity." I nodded and pulled out a pre-prepared piece of paper. "You have 3 hours to pack your things and leave my house, all of you, without exception, including Hezekiah and Prue." Prue gasped, and Hezekiah turned even paler. "Mom, this is too much. I'm your son, the son who betrayed my trust. You made a choice when you decided to bring all these people into my home against my will." I turned to the others. I will make no legal claims for damages on the condition that none of you ever cross the threshold of my home again. That applies to everyone except Hezekiah. I looked at my son again. You, Hezekiah, have a choice to make. Either you stay with your wife's family and our paths part, or you admit your mistake, apologize, and rebuild your relationship with me, but on my terms. That's an ultimatum. It's reality. Every choice has consequences. Prue grabbed Hezekiah's arm. You can't let her manipulate you after what she did to us. What I did was a direct consequence of your actions. An hour later, the house had electricity and water back on, and the Baxter family was frantically packing. I watched the whole thing from my office. 15 minutes before the deadline, Hezekiah knocked on the door. I've made a decision, he said after a pause. I'm leaving with Prue and her family, not because I agree with what they've done, but because what you did, it changed something between us. I felt a stab of pain, but I didn't show it. Explain. You locked us in, Mom. No water, no lights, no way out. For a week, with children and the elderly. It was brutal, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again. I understand, and you have to understand that I feel the same way. You violated my trust by letting 17 strangers take over my house against my will. Maybe we've both crossed a line that can't be crossed twice. Maybe we both need time. Time doesn't always heal, Hezekiah. Sometimes it just allows us to get used to the pain. Goodbye, Mom. Yeah, I'll call you when we're settled. No, you won't, but I'll be waiting if you decide to. He left the office. Soon I heard the cars leaving, taking the Baxter family away, and my son with them. When the sounds of the cars leaving died down, the house was quiet. I walked through the rooms, assessing the damage. There were signs of the week-long quarantine everywhere. Dirty stains, scratches on furniture, scattered belongings. In my bedroom, which was occupied by Prue's parents, there was still a picture of them on the dresser that they'd forgotten to pick up. In the kitchen, someone had left a note. We're sorry. I crumpled it up and threw it away. Forgiveness should be earned, not begged. I made myself some tea and went out onto the terrace. My garden was in a state of disrepair. The flower beds were trampled, the rose bushes broken, the grass yellowed. It would take months to rebuild what had been destroyed in a few days. But I can do it. I always have. Since Alfred's death, I've learned to live alone. Losing Hezekiah will be painful, but not fatal. Perhaps someday he will realize that I did what I thought was necessary, that I defended my boundaries as best I knew how. In the meantime, I will live as I have lived before, and wait, though without much hope. The sun was setting. I had won my battle, but at what cost? The house was mine again, but Hezekiah was gone. I had taught a lesson, but I had paid too high a price for it, and yet I didn't regret what I'd done. Sometimes principles are worth more than relationships. Sometimes loneliness is the price of maintaining one's dignity. I finished my tea and went back inside. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I had a lot of work to do. Life goes on with or without Hezekiah.